Hello, thank you guys for joining us. My name is Raj Badrinath. I'm from Nutanix. Welcome to the last and final round for the Data Center Madness webinar series. We've saved the best for the last, everyone, with discussions about a topic that's on every IT pro's mind these days, the cloud. But before we get started, let's cover a few housekeeping items. First, remember that we are giving away a pair of awesome 1992 Olympic Air Jordan 7 sneakers signed by Michael Jordan himself at the end of today's event. You'll definitely want to stick around for that. If you have questions, ask. We will be taking questions at the end of the event. Just use your Q&A tab on the On24 interface and enter your questions, and we will take as many questions live on the air as we can. Now, let's turn our attention to a question that keeps CIOs and IT pros up at night. Where should I run my workloads? Are IT teams playing a home game or traveling to play an away game? For workloads, are keeping things local or are they sending them off somewhere else? There are all kinds of great options out there, from running an on-premises data centers to running in a hosted or colo environment to running workloads right in the cloud. Which option makes the most sense for your business? To kick off our discussion, we'll be talking with Stephen Foskett with Gestalt IT and Paul Woodward Jr. with Presidio about on-premises versus hosted deployments. But before we get to that, Stephen and Paul, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll start with Stephen.
Excellent. Thanks, Raj. So, yeah, I'm Stephen Foskett, and I am the organizer of Gestalt IT and Tech Field Day. I've been writing and speaking predominantly about storage, but also about virtualization for a couple of decades now. And we started Gestalt IT as a way to bring that sort of writing together for people to read. We started Tech Field Day sort of for the same reason, so that people can meet with companies in their space and learn about products and technologies.
Perfect. Paul?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am Paul Woodward Jr. I'm with Presidio. I'm a data center systems engineer out of the Wisconsin region. I'm also heavily involved in the community. I do a lot of VMUG events. I'm a 2017 vExpert and 2017 Nutanix Technology Champion. And you can find me on Twitter at ExploreVM, and I blog and podcast at explorevm.com.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so what makes sense and how do organizations make a decision about which one to choose? But to understand the answer to this question, we need to come to grips with some technology-related behavior and psychology. Let's start with Stephen to ask a question that often yields some terrifying results. How much shadow IT do you think is taking place in the typical enterprise? Why is the answer to this question so important for guiding workload placement decisions, Stephen?
Well, that's a real hard question to answer because, of course, if I knew the answer, it wouldn't be shadow IT, would it? But truthfully, there's probably quite a lot. When I was working in industry, in finance and oil and gas, even environments like that had a lot of IT resources and very good control over IT, still had shadow IT. And of course, this has been going on since the history of IT. I mean, that's how the PC came in the first place, was through shadow IT and shadow budgets. For that reason, I think it's pretty safe to say that most companies have a fair share of critical applications that are already running either in the cloud or even on premises in shadow IT equipment.
Paul, what do you think?
I would have to agree. There was a study done in 2015 that stated something like 83% of CIOs see some sort of unauthorized shadow IT going on in their organization. And that was done as well as 35% expenditure was anticipated on shadow IT. It's definitely very prevalent out there in the world for sure.
Okay, so that gets me to really ask the question, are companies really trying to get out of the data center business, or are they just seeking more efficient ways to operate in these environments? Stephen.
I don't think that companies are necessarily trying to get out of the data center business. I mean, maybe that's a good move for them, since after all, the companies that I spoke about previously, I mean, they're not data center companies and they're not IT companies. maybe they should consider whether or not they want to be in this business. But I think overall, companies aren't trying to move out of IT so much as trying to get IT under control, while at the same time serving the needs of the internal customers and external customers that need access to their systems. I tell you, I think all of us can think of some companies that probably should get out of the IT business, but frankly, that's not really what they're trying to do. I think they're just trying to make things work.
What do you think, Paul?
I would say companies are not trying to get out of the data center business per se, more so than the bottom line rules everything. And if things can be done quicker, cheaper, and it helps the organization succeed at its business goals, then moving some, if not everything, to the cloud makes more sense, or public or private hosted, whichever option works best for the company.
So this brings us to an interesting question, right? So there's a spectrum of choices that you have. What role do cloud service providers play versus the public cloud providers? Paul, you go first.
I would say that some of the smaller private cloud providers, they're more localized. You can access them easier. You can speak with people there. In some cases, you can actually tour these facilities. You can go and see where your information is going to be housed. You get a little bit better customer service that way. And to some of the IT management, knowing exactly where their data is going to live is very important. So being able to say, yeah, it's not here, but we can go there and look at it, it seems to appease a lot of C-level executives and management types that I've seen throughout the years.
And then, of course, there's also managed services providers. In many cases, large enterprises, and actually even small ones like my own, have a variety of services that are provided, specialty services that are provided to them. And it makes sense to hire an expert to do something, like email or web services. If that's not your business, that's what we use. Or to use an expert with, payment processing and even larger tasks, financial transactions and, geophysics and media entertainment. I've seen a lot of these specialty managed services providers. And I feel like that is a wonderful use of IT resources that are not your own. Whereas if you're doing something that's much more focused on your particular business, you really do have to try to figure out how to do that yourself, whether it's regardless of the location.
Now, one question that it leads to is about accountability and control. What do you guys think about accountability and control as it relates to managed services and infrastructure hosting and co-location? Stephen, why don't you go first?
Well, that's a big problem, isn't it? Because if it's not their business, if it's something that they're doing for someone else, perhaps they don't take things as seriously as you, or perhaps they don't even see the way in which the decisions regarding infrastructure and services and uptime, how they affect you. I could think of cases, for example, where a service provider in one location is servicing a company on the other side of the world. They might think it's perfectly fine to shut everything down in the middle of the night, even though that's in the middle of your business day. And even if it's not something extreme like that, you do have to worry about how seriously they're taking your issues and your concerns. If you're a small company, are they going to treat your small set of the business with the urgency that you would love it to have?
Paul, what do you think?
I would say it comes down to the trust relationship you have built with the vendor or with the cloud provider or the managed services provider. At one point in my career, I did work for a managed services provider that offered a private cloud offering, and we focused on the small and medium-sized business. And everyone was treated as if they were the same size. Uptime was crucially important. Everybody had SLAs, and it really took a lot of the workload off of the end user. They didn't have to keep up with the maintenance on the hardware. They didn't have to worry about replacing disks and storage. They didn't have to worry about network changes. So it's all about trust. And frankly, as somebody who provides the cloud and provides these compute resources, if people can't trust you with their information and their data and they can't trust you to be up, they take their business away. So I think it's being able to deliver not only is good for your clients, but it's also really good to help keep you in business.
And I think that's really the key that Paul mentioned just now is having SLAs and having agreements. A lot of this stuff maybe comes down to the fact that people might not know what your requirements are, the things that I was alluding to earlier. You have to make sure that you've specified those. And that can actually be pretty challenging. It's fairly difficult to really write down what your requirements are. I mean, if you think about, I guess, anything in life, what do you really need someone to provide you? It takes a while to be able to articulate that in a way that people are going to be able to put it into practice. You're hiring a babysitter. What are your expectations? Well, it's the same with hiring a managed service provider. What are your expectations? What are your real requirements? And what are you willing to pay to make sure that those requirements are met?
Really good point. So you talk about trust, really, right? So let's drill into that a little bit, right? Who do you think enterprise IT pros and risk managers really trust more? Is that your local IT, for example, has it to do with security experts? Or do you think it's the cloud service provider's security staff?
Well, I could see making a case that it would be the local staff, the in-house staff, because of course, the nice thing about in-house staff is that their paycheck comes from the same place your paycheck does, and that puts a little pressure on them to make sure that they're living up to, or that they have the same goals as you. But on the flip side of that, one of the things that I've thought about a lot, and when it comes to outsourcing, and especially outsourcing managed services, is the idea of focus. Certainly somebody like myself, I could run my own email server, I could run my own web server. I choose not to. Not because I don't have the skills to, but because I feel like I would trust someone whose job is web servers 100% of the time more than I would trust myself, who really has no business messing with that. And it's the same with large companies. If you hire a service provider for a specific task, then perhaps you're going to get a better level of service than trying to do it in-house.
Good point. Paul?
Well, I'm going to throw on the consultant hat really quick and say it depends. If you look at local experts, they know the risk profile of the area, the community, and they really know the company well. But also, if your organization has lost trust in your IT department, they may look outside to vendors or to other solution providers to provide that security. It's really one of those, hey, let's assess what works best. And your in-house IT might be great. Your in-house security might be great. Then you bring in a vendor to come help take a look or make sure everybody's doing everything to best practice. There's really a lot of ways that we can look at this.
Let's talk about the bigger question that's on everyone's mind. It's really about the money, right? So how do the economics play out for on-prem deployment versus service providers? Stephen.
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, that is the key question. I mean, if something's too expensive, well, it doesn't matter how much you'd like it, and it doesn't matter how great it is, you can't have it. I feel that really scale lends some perspective on this question. So if you have a small section of the company, maybe one application, maybe a short-term need, I think the economics of the cloud blow away anything in-house. I mean, imagine if you had to buy a whole bunch of servers for use for only a couple of months, right? There's just no way that the economics would work out for that. Whereas when you start looking at something that's going to be long-lasting, large scale, I think it's very, very difficult to make the case for cloud purely on an economic sense. In that case, you have to start asking these other questions about focus and levels of service and perhaps other externalities that don't have a lot to do with economics. Really buying your own equipment and running it in your own data center with your own people managing it is probably always going to be cheaper at large scale and for the long run. And that's how we see the largest users of IT. That's exactly what they're doing, especially if they can reduce the level of effort required to manage these systems and bring those skills in-house.
Paul, do you have anything to add to this real quickly?
Yeah, I would say it also comes down to what does your company value more? Are you looking to reduce your OpEx? Or are you looking to reduce CapEx? Do you really want to spend a few million, up to a few $1 million up front to put in all the new data center or to keep it up to date? Are you okay with, in essence, leasing space somewhere and not really getting a return on that money aside from not having to spend it all up front? To Stephen's point, being able to quickly scale out, is a hybrid solution going to work better, where you can just do some burst computing versus having to do 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 nodes, and then most of them not being used because that's only during peak workloads. You really have to assess the situation based on the performance of the company, what's going on within the IT, and how you want to look at it with economics.
Perfect. Stephen and Paul, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. There's a whole lot to think about when it comes to where we run the application. Now, let's ask you, the audience, a question. We want to understand what your thoughts and challenges are around the topics we're discussing today. On your screen, you will see a question. We will give you 1 minute to answer it, and while you're doing so, we will bring in our next speakers.
Good afternoon and good morning, folks. This is Scott Lowe. You're going to see a question on your screen right now while we're preparing for the next portion of our presentation. Please take a moment to answer this question. We'll have one more question for you in just a second. So we'll leave this question up for just a minute. We'll be right back. If you don't see the question, please look under the slide window. Sometimes on 24 it gets the windows overlapping, so please look behind the slide window before giving up on the questions. And this will be our second question for today. And you're not going to see audio and video right now while the questions are up, just because we have the slide window is currently occupied with a poll question. So don't worry that you're not seeing video right now. We'll be right back with more video. And we'll take a quick peek at the results for our questions. These are the reasons that people are not choosing cloud services today. These are the challenges that they're trying to overcome in their decision-making process to try to go to cloud. Some of them look at cost, obviously, and security are two big considerations people have when they're considering whether or not to move to the cloud. And in this case, we see a lot of people that have those as things that are holding them back from moving to the cloud. And as we look at the kinds of workloads that people are going to be running in the cloud, we ask what percentage of workloads will run in public cloud services. And less than 10%, 50% of you are saying less than 10%. So there's still a long way to go when we start looking at public cloud for organizations.
And now, on to the final head-to-head of our webinar series. We're joined by Nutanix' own Sachin Chheda and Scott from Actual Tech Media. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Let's do a quick introduction, Sachin. Why don't we start with you first and then on to Scott. So what do you do, and can you just tell a little bit about why this is interesting?
Absolutely. So, Raj, I'm the head of solutions and vertical marketing at Nutanix.
Scott?
Thanks. I'm Scott Lowe. I'm the partner in and CEO of Actual Tech Media.
Excellent. Okay, guys, so let's talk about the cloud for a minute. For a lot of people, it's seen as a threat. For others, it's seen as an opportunity. And for others still, it's a complete unknown. Part of the problem is that the term cloud has been running up and down the court for years with shifting definitions at every play. And now we have all kinds of modifiers attached to it, such as public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, enterprise cloud. It's enough to drive an IT pro mad. Let's focus in on just two of these and get a bit of context to help the audience get to a baseline. Let's start with you, Sachin. What is the difference between public cloud and enterprise cloud?
That's a great question, Raj. But before we go into the differences, let me quickly start with a definition of what I feel people consider to be a cloud. Well, cloud is really the concept of delivering IT as a service, whether it's an application, whether it's a platform, whether it's storage, etc. So the intent is to move away from where bespoke infrastructure or separate infrastructure for individual areas and delivering this now as a service.
I completely agree. In fact, one of the things that I talk a lot about is this idea of cloud being a journey, not a destination. And I've written about this ad nauseum, and I really believe that people are not looking to adopt the cloud. They're looking for the kinds of outcomes the cloud can provide. Economic differences, workload flexibility, ease of management, scalability, on demand, user self-service, all that stuff that goes into what you consider associated with public cloud infrastructure, but regardless of where the workload runs.
So now let's get back to the question of the differences between a public cloud and an enterprise cloud. So a public cloud is essentially a shared resource offered by a service provider to maybe a group of people, a community, or the public at large. And it's essentially delivering these IT services that normally would be deployed on-prem or deployed through a service provider in a dedicated environment. A good example of this is AWS. Another one is Microsoft Azure. These are cloud service providers that are delivering infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, applications as a service. And in these public clouds, you essentially see the opportunity to go on their sites or go on to their portals, use APIs essentially to trigger services. Now, again, billing is done in a very methodical fashion from that perspective. So it is essentially built as a service based on what you consume. Now, one of the characteristics of the public cloud is the fact that it is a shared resource, right? And there may be various definitions of how these services are deployed. It also depends a little bit on the type of service that is being deployed, but essentially we're talking about a shared pooled resource that is basically leveraged by others. Now, that's where the enterprise cloud differs a little bit, right? Enterprise cloud is the concept of basically taking the best of on-prem infrastructure, more specifically the control and the security aspects of it, and the aspects of basically isolating that instance or dedicating instances associated with that and melding that with the best of public cloud infrastructure, which are the characteristics that Scott talked about around self-service, around catalogs, around delivery in a very quick and easy fashion. And basically by melding both of those together, we're getting the concept of an enterprise cloud.
Scott, what do you think?
I completely agree. I see the enterprise cloud as sort of the next iteration of what we used to call private cloud. And I think that's part of the reason why people are confused about these terms is because we've sort of not defined them well over the years, unfortunately. But I do see that as we move forward, we're wanting people to look at everything they're doing in IT much more strategically. And I think when we start looking at what Sachin was talking about as far as melding the best of both public cloud and private cloud, or private data center infrastructure and public cloud, and moving to a more to a place where we get more of the benefits that we see from public cloud, then we're moving to the world of enterprise cloud. People are going to be far better off for it at the end of the day.
So if you were to sort of look into your crystal ball and ask the question on which cloud do you think will rule in 2 years or in 5 years time frame, how do you categorize that, right? How do you want IT pros to think about their cloud decisions? And what are the parameters, if you will, that help define that, if not for one clear winner?
That's actually a really good question. Many people have hypothesized how the future will evolve. But one thing I definitely feel that will happen, and many agree here, is the future comprises of many clouds. Mm-hmm. there will be clouds for various services that get delivered, right? And it's important to understand the concept of a cloud, right? We talked a little bit about this earlier, where we talked about individual clouds delivering services. And these services could be infrastructure as a service, where you could run a virtual machine or a container. It could be a platform as a service, where you're accessing a certain a platform aspect of it, which could be like a JVM or some sort of characteristic. And most recently, we're seeing that go down to a function level, right? So function as a service. And those characteristics will decide how and where clouds get consumed. So I don't think the future is AWS or Azure or something else. It's actually a combination of all of those. And the combination is really defined by what IT needs, right? The applications are driving this. The functions and the services will drive this. And that's where the enterprise cloud comes into play. It's basically positioning one common layer across all these different clouds and giving the IT user, the IT administrator, the IT architect, the ability to decide how to orchestrate this. And this is, again, a short and midterm goal for Nutanix.
Scott, what do you think?
When I think about enterprise cloud and I think about the next 2 to 5 years, what I think about the key needs in the enterprise cloud being our abstraction and integration. And here's what I mean by that. We have this idea that the many cloud infrastructure is absolutely spot on. I mean, when I think about the future of IT, if I had to think about it in terms that are common, I'd say it's hybrid, absolutely. In some way, shape, or form. But enterprise cloud encompasses the hybrid moniker, so it's okay. But what I see as being much more important is the ability to weave all of these clouds together. And we're already seeing some of that. I mean, if you look at even software as a service plays like Office 365, you can easily integrate that with on-premises infrastructure, your on-premises Active Directory and all that good stuff. So that's an abstraction, that's an integration opportunity that Microsoft has built into the platform. But I also see those that are providing on-premises infrastructure as having to sort of take virtualization to the next level. And we have to be able to go beyond the hypervisor and be able to abstract all of our workloads, regardless of hypervisor, regardless of whether they're bare metal or physical, or bare metal or virtual, and so that we can shift them easily to where they make sense to run. If we're running something ourselves, it should be able to run locally, it should be able to run at Amazon over time. But this idea that we have to be able to also then integrate all these workloads, whether we're, again, sourcing from Microsoft for software as a service or even from a platform as a service, they have to be able to knit nicely with our on-premises infrastructure, because that's never going away. I don't care what people say. We're never getting away from an on-premises infrastructure in some way. I shouldn't say never, but it's unlikely in the near future that we're going to see that completely go away in most organizations.
So are you saying that, my currently heavily virtualized data center environment is not a cloud?
It's not. And it might be. Let me rephrase that. It depends. The answer to so much stuff is it depends, isn't it? And if you have a highly virtualized data center, you absolutely have a highly virtualized data center. That may be all you have. If all you've done is virtualize your workloads, you do not have a cloud. You have a highly virtualized data center. Once you've imbued that data center with cloud characteristics, like a cloud management system, or something that allows user self-service and automation and orchestration of processes so that users can deploy their own workloads, like you can with Amazon, like you can with Microsoft Azure, like you can instantiate mailboxes at Office 365, then you've gone to a private cloud type infrastructure. It's only once you've put those tools in place where it becomes cloud-like that you can really call it a cloud. And that's where we see a lot of people falling down the definition. They think, oh, I'm like 80% virtualized. I got my own private cloud here. And that's not true. We have to make sure people understand what the definitions mean so they can understand how they get from where they are to where they need to be.
And Raj, if I could add to that, right? I mean, this was a topic that was discussed ad nauseum at the last .next conference that was held in Las Vegas in 2016. Our CMO, Howard Ting, actually reviewed some slides in his keynote around this. And basically, there are a lot of folks who, again, are assuming that virtualization equals cloud. And there's more to it. Scott talked a little bit about that. Let me recap it for my own sake, right? We're talking about the concept of a catalog, the ability to create a service. And again, the service could be infrastructure, where you're running a virtual machine. It could be a platform where you're running a specific service associated with that. It could be a function. It could be storage. These things form a catalog. right? And then that catalog is now exposed to the end users. And we're talking about end users that can range from IT end users, so it could be constituents in the IT organization, or it could even be in the business unit, like a system analyst or a business analyst whose job is to make sure that there is a workflow set up for the business processes. Imagine in a supply chain situation where they need to onboard a new service provider, they need to onboard a new supplier. This is where essentially there is an automation of that workflow from an IT perspective, whether it's around building out the new service and connectors associated with that, and essentially speeding up the whole pace that IT exists in. The second aspect of this, after catalog and self-service, is the concept of application and data mobility. And this is very, very important, right? People call clouds out for basically being a destination. Scott actually has a really good point that he made earlier, which is the concept that cloud is a journey. It is not a destination, right? And for that to happen, you have to be able to use what is the right infrastructure, the right cloud, for the right workload, for the right time, for the right place. And that's where the application and data mobility comes into play. And that's a very, very important point from that perspective.
You know, so that kind of leads me to, again, I'll ask you guys the money question, right? Economics. What is different fundamentally between a public cloud economics and enterprise cloud economics? It seems like, you know, we have a lot of discussions about this, but it has to come down to the money, and otherwise you can't make a decision. So let's start with you, Scott. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental difference. I mean, when you start thinking about public versus private, one of the things we always hear about cloud, regardless of the context, is that you're going to go pay as you go, right? Now, sometimes that can be true for private cloud, but there's still going to be a slightly different economic story. It just depends on what kind of solution you go with, but public cloud, you're going to operationalize all your expenses. But there is going to be a point at which you're going to have a break-even point, and it's not going to be in your favor. So the more you put in the cloud, you could end up spending more than what you would spend by keeping it on site. And that's happened to people, and they're pulling back a little bit and moving to a more enterprise cloud-type methodology where they can better choose where their money's going rather than just dumping it all in the public cloud. On the enterprise cloud side, you're still going to have some CapEx. But when you build the right infrastructure that's easily scalable and granularly scalable. And what do I mean by that is I can grow in a step size that makes sense for my organization. I get much closer to that cloud-like pay-as-you-go economics than I can get with anything I've done with legacy infrastructure. And that's what I see as a key difference. With public cloud, it's all OpEx, but you're going to hit that break-even point where it's not going to work in your favor anymore. And with enterprise cloud, by deploying an infrastructure that is easily scalable and granularly scalable, you're going to get that kind of economic benefit that you get from cloud. Just a little bit of a combination of CapEx and OpEx rather than straight OpEx.
Sachin?
And yeah, if I can add to that, I mean, I'm going to use an example that our CEO, Dheeraj Pandey, uses quite frequently. It really depends on the type of workload, right? And so, for example, if you have a situation where you're looking at a workload that has to be spun up and then run for maybe a fraction of a week or maybe less than a month or so, right? You wouldn't deploy dedicated infrastructure for that. But what if you had a workload that was predictable in nature, that was not elastic, that was not unpredictable? It doesn't make sense to go out and actually rent infrastructure in that case. It's probably economically more viable and financially more viable to look at that as an investment and essentially get into the whole CapEx model associated with that. So the analogy that I wanted to bring up is the concept of vacation versus visiting a place versus living in a place, right? So if you're vacationing, essentially, you're not going to buy something dedicated for that purpose, right? You're going to essentially drive or go to a hotel and rent a hotel by the night, etc., right? Say you're going there for a little bit longer. You may end up renting a room or renting an apartment, etc. But if you're going to live somewhere, if you're going to be there for a lot longer, it makes sense to actually buy into the market. And that's where the same analogy applies for infrastructure as well. We're essentially talking about the transition from an unpredictable or temporary or elastic workload to a predictable workload. And that decides kind of where they run, how they run, and who are the ones delivering that service.
I use a similar analogy, but with cars. So I can either buy a car, lease a car, or rent a car. And I look at it as if I'm going to buy a car, it's because I'm going to beat it up and I'm going to use it all the time, and I don't care how many miles I put on it and all that good stuff. When I want to lease a car, I have to be careful how much I use it, because there is going to be a point at which when I turn it in, it's going to have too many miles, and I'm going to pay more than I would if I just bought the car. And that goes back to my point before about at some point the cloud model doesn't quite work out in your favor. And then I'm going to rent a car if I just need it for a day, like you said. So it's a very similar analogy. But I'm not going to, when I go on vacation, I'm not going to buy a car wherever I go to go back and forth to the hotel and my vacation spots. I wish I could, but I can't.
Perfect. Makes sense. So Scott and Sachin, thank you for helping us wrap up our Data Center Madness series. This has been a great event series that we hope that have helped you, the IT pros around the world, better understand all of the options that you have at your disposal. We also believe that Nutanix provides an enterprise cloud solution that can help you solve your most challenging IT issues. We'll look forward to talking with you about what we can do to help you get a three-pointer as you consider new data center technologies.
We have a number of questions that have come in from the crowd, and I'm very happy to take as many questions as possible today. This is Scott. I'll be taking all of your questions today. First of all, one of the questions that came in is, I think it's an important one because there's a lot of misinformation about what cloud is and how it works. And the question is hybrid cloud better than public cloud? Now, the thing is there's really, you can't really do that comparison. And the reason you can't is because public cloud is encompassed inside hybrid cloud. So, for example, if you've got a local private cloud and you're using Amazon for other things, and you've got them connected together in some way, you've got a hybrid cloud. There's a public component to the hybrid cloud. So you can't really say that one is better than the other. Now, if you want to look at it in the context of is hybrid cloud better than public cloud, in that should I maintain a local data center versus go all into the cloud? That's really a decision you have to make with regard to the kind of workloads you're running, the kind of company you are, and financially. Again, you can't really say one is better than the other. It really comes down to the kinds of workloads that you're going to be running. Another question we have is how secure is the cloud? And the answer to that is, again, it depends. It depends on what you're going with. It depends on how you're integrating it into other services, and it depends on the provider you're using. Now, here's the thing, though. A lot of cloud providers have had to really step up their security game. So when you think about an Amazon or an Azure, or even a smaller or private cloud provider, they have had to really step up their security game, and they have people who would put most organizations' security folks to shame when it comes to understanding how to secure systems. So I think it's important to consider security in the cloud and work with your cloud provider to make sure that you're going to remain secure. And obviously, if you're in certain types of organizations that have high regulatory oversight, you may have to take different precautions than you would with other types of organizations. We had a question earlier about back to the early discussion in this presentation about shadow IT, and it was, how do you quantify the impact of shadow IT? And there's really a number of factors that come into play here. And it comes down to what kind of personnel needs are necessary to maintain all of those systems. What is it doing from a security perspective and compliance to the organization? If you're leaving yourself at risk, it may not be a direct immediate cost, but it could ultimately have a pretty negative financial impact on the organization. So there's lots of different factors that go into understanding how much shadow IT costs beyond potential for losing economies of scale with regard to licensing and systems and things like that. Now, looking at some other questions here. Another question is, do you see a multi-cloud enterprise environment grow in an organization? So basically, I believe that what's being asked is, are we seeing the rise of organizations adopting multiple clouds? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We have our local private cloud, and we have people choosing things like software as a service environments, which are cloud. If you look at Office 365 and Salesforce and things like that, those are cloud type systems that we want to make sure that we consider. And so we have people adopting Amazon and Azure and things like that. So yes, we're seeing the rise of multi-cloud enterprises. And as time goes on, we're going to see the local data center become just one component among many clouds that are being adopted among organizations. And I'm looking at some other questions here. I apologize if you were hearing the music. So the other question is, why are we still discussing virtual versus physical when everything can be virtualized? The answer is everything can be virtualized, but not everything is virtualized. We still see organizations that are not virtualizing all of their workloads. We still see some that are taking a physical approach to some of their workloads. We see organizations that are, for various reasons, still not considering virtualization at all in some cases. In fact, recently I actually, at a speaking engagement, talked to an organization who said, we will not do virtualization. It doesn't make sense for us. We don't trust it. And okay, some people are just not comfortable with technology. So we are still in a place where, although virtualization is the norm for most, it is not the norm for all. So it's still, and we also don't see everyone being 100% virtualized. So it's still an important question that we need to think about. And I apologize if you were hearing, I don't know why the video from earlier restarted, so I apologize for that. And I think that's, oh, here we go. What are some of the features of public cloud and how they differ from private cloud? Well, when you think about a private cloud, first of all, that's generally considered to be a local data center. So if you think about public cloud, we have some characteristics that we are trying to accomplish. We're trying to adopt for our own organization. One is the operationalized economic model that we talked about earlier in the segment. We want to be able to avoid all these capital expenditures that we've had in place for a number of years, for decades in some cases. We're also looking for things to be a little more streamlined. We're looking for user self-service. We're looking for easier scalability and things like that. What we're trying to do is bring those kinds of features to the private cloud. So that's what we're really trying to accomplish here. So when we say, what are the features of the public cloud and how are they different than the private cloud? Ultimately, if you have a private cloud, you should have some of those capabilities already. Otherwise, as I said in the segment, you're just highly virtualized. You're not actually a private cloud. Until you have a model that allows you to easily scale the environment, until you have a model that gives you sort of more of a pay-as-you-grow methodology, you're really highly virtualized and you haven't fully adopted cloud-like characteristics that are so important to a lot of organizations today. And that's all the questions we have time for today.
Now, the moment you've been waiting for, we have a Michael Jordan signed 1992 Olympic Air Jordan 7 sneakers to give away to a lucky winner. And man, is this suspense killing me. Scott, would you do the honors of telling the audience who's going to get a set of really awesome pair of shoes? Big shoes.
And we have some lucky winners today. Number one of our prize winners, we have a PS4 to give away today with NBA 2017 as well. And our winner for the PS4 is Doug Lloyd from Georgia. Doug, congratulations. You're a big winner of a PS4 with NBA 2017. And then we have our grand prize for the series. This is a pair of Michael Jordan signed shoes. They're going to be big shoes, folks. So if you don't have big feet, you probably won't be able to wear them. But our winner for the shoes is Anita Essex, also from Georgia.
Thank you so much to all of you who attended our webinar series. We will be following up with you shortly. Have a great week.